now have camera on air, can't you? Which is
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's planning control meeting. Before we go on, can I ask you all to either switch your phones off or put them on silent? So I'm not feeling very well, so I'm hoping you take it easy. I was going to send in my apologies, but Councillor Potter, the rotter, got in before me and sent his apology in as my vice chair, so I've had to come in. Do we have any apologies from anybody? No? Okay. Late items to be introduced by me, there are none. Declarations of interest, anybody? No. Minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of December 22. Thank you. Seconder? Yes, thank you. Appeals decisions. I believe it's Ian to tell us about them.
Thank you, Chair. Just two results to report, both good inspectors' decisions. First one at 103 Ashbourne Road was to convert an existing commercial office storage building to residential accommodation for 24 flats. And one of the main issues was the resultant living environments which were proposed and the external amenity space that was being provided. It was something we're quite concerned about. We refused permission on those grounds, and the inspector, in quite a long decision letter, agreed with us. And it's worth a read, actually, in terms of paragraph 16 of the letter concludes about the living conditions, and latterly in the statement he also talks about the tilted balance policy position, which will be au fait with, and he suggested that the benefits of the scheme, the economic benefits, did not outweigh the disbenefits, and that they were significantly and demonstrably affected, or would outweigh those benefits in that way. So a good result, good wording from the inspector in that regard. And the second case was a rather large house extension to a dwelling at 14 Pendlebury Drive. The site is located on the bend of Pendlebury Drive, and there's a sloping land level across the site. So the side extension stood at 3 stories in height, and was quite a powerful proposition within the street scene. And the inspector, in a more brief decision letter, agreed with us also, but concluded well and supported our policies in the development plan. So 2 good results there, Chair. Nice to report. I'd recommend that the letters are given some scrutiny. Many thanks.
Thank you, Ian. Item 6, applications to be considered tonight. The first one is pages 1 to 10 on your agenda papers, 43 Sherburn Street. And to tell us about that is Ian.
Thanks again, Chair. Just one item to report in terms of housekeeping updates. A letter of objection on behalf of Parkfield Cedars Community Group. That was circulated to all yesterday with the late items. Not got a lot to add to this, Chair, in terms of the main report. It says it all in terms of the history of the building, the current occupation as a HMO, and this proposal to add another person to that. I will pass over to the speakers who are here to address members. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. No, I know Councillor Repton has asked me to let him speak first because of his daughter's in hospital, but I feel that it would be beneficial to you, Councillor Repton, if you heard Mr. Tuckwell and the architects as to what it is they're saying, and then you can base your judgment on that. So, Mr. Tuckwell, you have 3 minutes, and good evening.
Good evening. First of all, I'd like to thank you for allowing me to speak on this application. To confirm, it's a retrospective application for an 8-bedroom HMO following Derby City Council Resources and Housing Department granting a licence. To confirm, the site is currently was historically a 7-bedroom HMO for the last 20 years. So this application is only asking for 1 additional bedroom space for 1 further applicant. The site is located within a 5-minute walk to Derby University, and it's predominantly a residential area with a lot of students. It's a highly sustainable location as it's easy access to the university and city centre either by foot or by excellent public transport. It must also be noted that this application does not propose any material changes to the external elevations of the building as part of this application. In response to the following objections raised in terms of parking demand, traffic generation and pressure on the drainage systems and antisocial behaviour, we believe that 1 more occupant is not going to cause a detrimental impact on the local community. Regards the standards of the accommodation, the applicant has recently purchased the property and undertaken extensive improvements to a high standard, and this was confirmed by Derby City Council's Resource Housing Officer in the Planning Officer's report, based on their experience from licensing HMOs within Derby. The Highways consultations also supports the development, stating that there's ample parking through management through car parking permits. I can also advise the applicant has also incorporated a secure bike storage at the rear of the property following the recommendations of the Highway Officer. I hope that you all agree that Derby City Council's Planning Department, agree with Derby City Council's Planning Department that the grant of permission for a 1 additional bedroom as the proposed development is fully compliant with national and local planning policy and assists Derby City Council in reducing the housing shortages. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tuckwell. You're well within time there. I mean, probably give Councillor Repton a bit more time to speak. Not really, Martin. Councillor Repton, if you would like to speak now.
Thank you, Chair. We've had problems in this area with bins on streets, and we've had to involve with our public protection officers, and we've had many complaints from local people, particularly concerning houses in multiple occupation. And I think this is 1 room too far. There's only so much that a certain area and community can take. And you were brave enough at the last meeting to turn down an application in Highfield Road. It was the right decision to make, and I understand that now the developer's gone back to a much reduced actual occupancy, which, whilst not ideal for local people, will ease the problems. Now, with regard to this, it will lead to additional parking, it will lead to additional problems, and I would urge members to adhere to that concept of localism. Have the strength of your convictions again tonight, I would urge you. Be brave and say no. Enough is enough. Reject this application in the interest of local people and putting down a marker that we need to get control over HMOs in this city. They're causing untold problems and damage to local communities and local people and local families. And indeed, they're reducing the number of family homes in the area. So I think on every occasion, we should be exerting our authority and also be brave and reject this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Repton. I'm now going to ask Ms. Guthrie to speak, and then after that will be Councillor Martin.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Repton, as well. I'd just like to note that I'm here in my capacity solely as Chair of Parkfield Cedars Community Group, not in my personal or professional capacity. Parkfield Cedars is a group of residents, and it is just residents. It's open to students, but they don't join. We cover Longford, Sherwin and Cedar Street area, so I'm familiar with the property. The key concern, I'm here because residents have asked me to come and represent them and speak on their behalf. The key concern is the lack of affordable family housing in this area. What we need is communities that are diverse, where there is a balance, and the balance in this area is skewed in favour of profiteering landlords. It's close to the university, it's asset stripping the neighbourhood, it's getting houses on the market for maximum profit, not to meet the needs of the local community. This property, I know, was recently available to rent on Rightmove, making an income of over £4,000 a month. That's an unnecessary amount of money, and it means that families that want to move up from a 2-bed house because they've got children, they want to stay in the area, they want to use the local schools, they're just priced out of the market. The other point I want to make about this is that where you've got new builds, then developers over a certain size are required to contribute to society through the Section 106 procedure. You know, they need to make commitments for infrastructure, for resources, towards communities, towards affordable housing. People who come in with this kind of project and they do one here, move on, do another one, move on, do another one, they end up sitting on a vast pot of wealth at the expense of the community. That's the primary point that I want to make. We don't have a framework for social responsibility. The density in that area is already, it's small terraced houses. I live there myself. You put 8 different households into one building. Of course it's going to have parking issues. Of course it's going to have density and noise issues. How we can say there's ample parking, 8 households and one allocated permit space, I don't understand that. I note also that the gentleman that spoke earlier, the architect, talked about reducing housing shortages. Well, we don't have a student housing shortage, we have a family home shortage. I know this because I've rented out my home before, I've offered to rent it before, and there is an overwhelming clamour from local families for that kind of accommodation. So yeah, I totally support what Martin Repton said, that we need to draw a line somewhere. People are profiteering out of our communities and we need to stop it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Martin, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I also asked the Planning Committee members to refuse this planning application. As has been said, and I reiterate, Sherwin Street is in an area of high density housing, small terraced house upon small terraced house, with parking issues such that a residence per parking scheme has been introduced in the last few years. The map in the planning document shows a couple of licensed HMOs in the area. What it doesn't show is the unlicensed HMOs and the high volume of shared houses there are in that area. This residence has been an unlicensed HMO of 7 people since 2004, so the documents say. How many other unlicensed HMOs exist in these streets, which is known locally as the 3 streets? No one gave permission for 7 households to live in this property, and yet the planning officer is using that as a basis to say that adding 1 more household will make no difference and recommends acceptance. This, in my view, is a kind of planning permission via the back door. Instead of converting this residence to an H-person HMO, it could have been turned into a couple of flats or indeed rendered a family house. These are declining in the area. But no, yet another person is squeezed into 1-room style accommodation because that is the most profitable option for the property owner. If we grant this retrospective planning permission, what's to stop all the other unlicensed HMOs doing work to add just 1 more into already dense housing spaces? No. It's time to put a stop to this unbalanced and often unlicensed spread of HMOs in our terrace streets. People already have little space in those areas, yet in areas with lower housing density, and I could name them but I won't, we see very few HMOs, if any. Instead of squeezing in 1 more and 1 more and 1 more, let's just take a stand for people who are likely to live in these HMOs and say, why not self-contained flats? Or, on the other hand, why not an affordable family house? Why not do something better for those with less? That's what many of the people who live in the 3 Streets community would like to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Ian, would you like to come back on any of the points made?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to highlight the scope of this application, the property has operated for some time as a 7-bed HMO. They haven't applied for a certificate of lawfulness, but if they had done to regularise that, it's very highly likely it would have been given. So we are talking about 1 extra occupant here. I would suggest that issues relating to the lack of affordable housing, the issues relating to affordable housing that is required to be given when we're looking at Section 106 developments. They are clearly an issue for the council in terms of the provision of affordable housing, but not for deliberation tonight with this particular application. Neither is the wealth or the income that may be generated from something like this. We are just looking at the land use planning merits and the addition of one person in this particular unit. Clearly, the applicant has provided photographs of the internal improvements. I mean, that's not something within the remit of this committee either, but it highlights that the improvements have been done to a high standard, and the fact that we have all the comments from our housing standards team that this has been operated in a fairly consistent and well managed manner in the last 15 to 20 years, and that is also something else that we have been mindful of. I know that the issue of HMOs does give this committee concern and their prevalence, but in this particular case and with this particular application, I think to do other than the recommendation, Chair, would be stranded at appeal. So I would promote that recommendation and open the floor to members.
Just for clarity, is it the same operator that's had this for the last 20 years, operating without a license?
I think Mr. Tuckle said that the developer had taken over this particular property, so that's my understanding, Chair.
When was this taken over?
He took it over at the beginning of last year and then did the works throughout the middle of last year. No, the applicant purchased it off someone who had been running it under licence since 2004 as a 7-bed HMO.
Yes, thank you. Now, before I open it up to the committee, there's a couple of points that I want to make. First and foremost, the issue of housing stock, etc. Well, the applicant brought that up by saying he's adding to it. And it's not adding to it. What it is doing is putting another individual in a room. It's not adding to any houses that a family could use or that we could consider as a stock unit for her. It is just a house of multiple occupation. 7 people living there before, unlicensed. Now they want to regularize it with another person and saying, well, look, it's not going to make any difference. Whether it does or not, it's not adding to our housing stock. This is not the type of housing we want when it's just conversion of family homes into single occupancy. Now, I have no issue with the houses in multiple occupation or whatever, but there has to be a limit. Everything in life that you go through, there has to be a limit. And I believe that, for the last 18 months, 2 years that we've been talking about it in this committee, that limit is being crossed on a daily basis and we're not doing anything about it. As regards, what Councillor Martin said, unfortunately, they're not going to turn it into 2 flats or 3 flats because there's a vast difference in terms of the income they generate when it's £2,000 for 2 flats and £4,000 for 8 single rooms. So I have no qualms about applicants making applications. It's up to us as an authority, it's up to us as a committee to turn them down and say, well, yeah, this is not suitable, or maybe it is suitable, whichever way it is. There's no premeditation, but there has to be a judgment call on whether it's right for the area, whether there are too many in the area. Now, saying that this is primarily for students, well, students' residence halls are empty. Why do we need to convert houses into student lettings? But that's my sort of perception of this, and as I said, I only mentioned it because of the applicant saying it's adding to our housing stock. It's not doing anything of the nature. Committee members. Councillor Kerr, then Councillor Carr.
Chair, I'm really sympathetic to the situation here. It is very close to the university. It's an area where students live, and it's very difficult to get students involved in a community organisation, however much a community organisation tries to engage. So I'm not surprised that this one doesn't have any student members. But in the case of this building, it is where it is. It's already got 7 people living there. It's already a student property. And to say one more will make a difference, well, it's one person who would otherwise be going into another property somewhere else, taking up a room somewhere else. So my feeling is that this is something that we need to follow the officer's advice on. But I've got 2 other points. One is I'm pleased to hear that some cycle parking has been provided to the rear, because that may make it easier for students to decide to not have a car, which they otherwise might do. But I just wondered whether we'd seen that cycle parking and whether the highways officers felt that it was adequate, or whether we need to put a condition into this. And secondly, Chair, I think it's a reminder that as part of our local plan, we need to make sure that we have stronger policies in the future to look at the number of HMOs in a particular area, in the same way as we make a statement about the number of fast food outlets in an area. And that is something that we need to continue to be mindful of, because this isn't making another HMO, but it's regularising something else. And just, Chair, the thing I'm not sure whether we can do or not, because this has been like this for potentially nearly 20 years. How many other HMOs are being licensed by the council, but planning have not regularised? Is there some way in which we can do some check between the departments to resolve that and make it clearer to planning as to whether, where enforcement potentially needs to get involved? Thank you.
Mike?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I have lots of sympathy for the arguments being put, but we've been here before, Chair, with in this committee. I read this with more than my usual care tonight, and I agree with what Councillor Kerr said. Until we can get some kind of higher authority or control of the HMO situation, we wouldn't have a prayer at appeal with this application, so I'm not going to refuse it, Chair.
Anybody else? Councillor Rawson.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst we do review every application as an individual application, a lot of the similar issues do come through time and time again with HMOs, and I think we can see some of those connected with this particular application as well. The over-intensification of HMOs in this particular area, I think, as already been mentioned, there does come a point where they reach a saturation point where it's just becomes very difficult for the infrastructure locally to cope with so many occupants in such properties. Given the number of student houses in this area, I think that probably is an issue in this case in terms of over-intensification. The other issue that comes up time and again is car parking, and to hear that there's only one car parking permit for 8 people at this property just isn't enough, and it's a recipe for causing congestion and parking problems in this street and the surrounding streets. And the other HMOs in the area are likely to be in a very similar position, with multiple people living there who aren't connected to each other and therefore all needing their own individual forms of transport, potentially bringing cars to park in the street. And I just think it gets too much, and these houses were built at a time when motor vehicles weren't planned for or part of daily life, and in my view, the surrounding infrastructure isn't capable of supporting that number of that density of people per property. So those are my concerns, Chair, much as you've raised yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rosen. Anybody else?
Covered by condition 3, Councillor Kerr.
Has somebody seen the cycle parking to see whether it's up to standard?
We'll control all the detail by condition, Councillor Kerr.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, look, had it been the same applicant operating this for the last 20 years unlicensed, I would have had no hesitation in saying, look, let's refuse them and teach them a lesson. But it is a new applicant, he's adding one room to it, and whilst I don't believe that this is the right course that this administration or committee should be taking, unfortunately, I can't say to you or to, anybody else that we should refuse this on a ground that we can defend. It hurts me to say that, but that is the situation, and until we do something about this, there isn't very little. Now, a resolution was passed in September in a full council meeting. So far, we're still dragging our feet on it. I don't know why, I don't know who is dragging his feet on it, but something should have been done. But as regards this current application, somebody like to move it to the vote and go with the recommendation? Councillor Carr moved and seconded. All those in favour of the recommendation?
That's 3 in favour, Chair.
All those against?
2 against, Chair.
Recommendation is carried. Moving on to item 2, pages 11 to 34, 220, Osmiston Road, and to tell us about that, I believe, is Ian again.
Many thanks, Chair. Housekeeping items to update the report that you were circulated to you yesterday. Consultation response from Highways to the amended plans. Consultation response from Transport Planning to the amended plans. 2 further objections, and the amended recommendation to accommodate the additional publicity period that we've carried out relative to those amended plans. Just onto the report, Chair. This proposal is for demolition of the existing buildings which are in a rather dilapidated state, and construction of 2 residential apartment blocks forming a total of 42 units with 1 and 2 bedrooms. One block, Block A, is 4-storey and would sit towards the front of the site, facing Osmiston Road. The second block, Block B, is 3-storey and smaller in footprint and would sit to the rear of the site. Latterly, in the application process, further on-site car parking spaces to the tune of 10 spaces has been secured at the rear between Block A and Block B to supplement the 11 spaces at the front of the site, giving 50% parking across the site. A rectangular area of on-site amenity space has been provided on the boundary with the existing properties on Grange Street. This alteration included reconfiguring some of the internal space within Block A to accommodate a wider undercroft to access that rear parking area. This change has not been to the detriment of the scheme's overall design. Internal cycle parking within Block A is to the tune of 20 spaces, with external cycle parking to the rear between spaces 18 and 19 in front of Block B, giving you a further 7 spaces. So that's 27 spaces in total, with 20 of those being secure and internal. The 2 blocks are of similar form. They will be flat-roofed, contemporary-style buildings faced in different coloured materials with rectangular proportions and large opening windows. The design and access statement talks about the use of a light-coloured brick to match some of the stuccoed appearance of properties nearby, to give it some consistency with its context. The frontage block is the larger of the 2, with a 4th floor inset from the side elevations, giving it a nice recessed appearance. Members have carried out a site visit, and the existing buildings have been in need of repair and restoration for some time. Photographs on the case file show that the building is now in a dangerous state, with some unsupported ground floor following its collapse into its own basement. I understand that the site is also subject to antisocial behaviour, and there has been unauthorised car parking on the site. Also, Chair, a previous application for residential development comprising 58 apartments on the site in a 4-storey building was refused earlier last year. This was on the grounds of poor design, excessive height and scale, unacceptable living environments and concerns about impacts on amenity. This was determined under delegated powers, and the current scheme, as amended with the additional car parking, is a much improved design solution. In the past, you may have heard officers refer to development in terms of place and time. And in my opinion, this proposal represents the right development in the right place at the right time. It would provide much needed housing in a highly sustainable location with 50% parking provision on site, good standards of amenity for future occupants, and given the footprint of the existing building, an acceptable built form in terms of scale and mass and relationship to neighbours. Amenity impact for existing neighbours would be within reasonable tolerances, and there are no sound planning reasons for resisting this proposal, particularly in the context of the tilted balance. Chair, I promote the recommendation as amended yesterday, and subject to the accompanying Section 106 being completed, I'd like to get this issued without further delay. And you've got no speakers, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Now, I've got some serious concerns about this application. For those of us that weren't on this committee prior to May last year, there was supposed to be a site visit carried out, and which was then stopped because there were issues about bats and other wildlife issues, and because of that, the application was stopped. Now, I read that we're not sure whether the bats are still there or not because of a collapse of the cellar roof, etc. You know, I'm not sure whether one of the local residents or a wildlife enthusiast went up to the bats and said, "Listen, chaps, it's quite dangerous for you to stop here," and they've decided to go into social housing or something, right? So I'm not sure what's happened to the bats, but this application was going to be dealt under delegated powers until I asked for this to be brought before the committee. Now, those of you that were with me on the site visit to the Engineer Club, I believe Councillor Prosser, Councillor Kerr, Councillor Carr, Councillor West, myself, and was it Councillor Nawaz? We were there. The applicant in this, which was the former Engineers Club, is making 32 apartments, 32 parking spaces, 32 cycle spaces. Now, we're not talking about a different street or a different area. We're talking about something that's 400 or 250 yards away from this. Now, this application wants to build 44 apartments, 4 single bed and 38 double beds or 2-bedroom ones. And initially they had parking space for 10 cars and 3 cycle spaces. And this was going to be, done under delegated powers. Now, in my experience, I think since 2004 that I've been on this committee, the only other longest serving people are Mike and Councillor Kerr there. Now, I believe that each and every one of us during that time have carried out our duties with honesty, integrity, and fairness, and I hope that we continue to do so in the future. What I'd like to see from this committee and future committees is to be able to stand up and say, well, hang on a minute. This criteria was applied to that application. Why isn't the same being applied to this? Now, I, for the life of me, can't understand when the highways officer talks about parking regarding the DRI site. What has that got to do with this application? The Nightingale development is having, each of them has got their parking spaces, and they're going to have what is already existent at the Castleboard area, a residence permit scheme. So there is no comparison to this, but it's been mentioned here as to that. Now, a person looking at this, whether they want to buy or rent, will say, well, you know, these side streets have got plenty of parking spaces. I can, because they won't be aware that already there are issues with parking and antisocial behaviour flagged. You only have to look across the road what's happening in Sydney Street, Barlow Street, Bateman Street, Ivy Square, to know that this is going to cause further problems. You will have, when these streets around it apply for residence parking, you will have the residents of this particular development parking their cars without a permit in Grange Street, Reginald Street, Bowden Street, all these areas. So why this is being allowed, you know, or was going to be allowed with 10 parking spaces, and yet further up the road we have an ideal development. Now, I would have hoped that the officers would have looked at this and said, well, hang on, we've got a precedence here, you know, let's adhere to that. But instead, we're being asked to approve this scheme. I honestly, you know, I'm baffled as to why we want to compound the issues. Have we not read the housing report and housing regeneration report and adult health report about the suffering of people in these inner wards, deprived wards, and yet we want to add more suffering to them? As I said, it beggars belief. I mean, you know, I have not been well. I was in hospital last week, but I understand that there's been further talk about housing, multiple occupation, and et cetera, on one of the news channels and Radio Derby, et cetera. I want to know what it is that we as elected members are doing to stop this, and what this administration, these officers, need to look at and say, well, okay, you know, we are here to look at planning issues, and maybe some of these things aren't related to, you know, planning. We can't refuse it on this ground, but there is a community fact which we can address. And this is now setting us back from the Engineers Club, is taking us back to a situation where, hey, anything goes in Arboretum, Normanton, Abbey, Darley, Mackworth, you know, parts of Elveston, parts of Cheddington. Where is this going to stop? I'm honestly, I'm totally baffled. And as I said, it was probably luck that I'm here, because if Councillor Potter hadn't sent in his apologies, I would not have come. But I am, you know, I was totally annoyed when I saw this, that they wanted to approve it under delegated powers. Why was this even considered to be approved under delegated powers, when already we had a scheme that we can say to these developers, look at it. Now, I attach no blame to the applicants in what way, any way, shape or form, because they have put an application in. It is up to our officers, it is up to this committee to deem it worthy of passing or refusing. But that is, you know, something that I had to say to you, and I honestly, you know, I'm at a loss as to what's happening here. Why certain criteria aren't being met in certain wards, why there is a free-for-all on one side, and we're very... if this application was in one of the suburban wards, it would have been laughed out, never mind ask for approval. To have 44 apartments and say, well, you know, 10 parking spaces is enough, 3 parking cycle spaces is enough, it just beggars belief. And I don't know how we can even, you know, sort of look at this and keep a straight face. Members of the committee. Councillor Nawaz.
Thank you, Chair. After all that, what can I say? You know, this is our ward, and parking is such a big problem. I live around the corner from there, and I don't know how we can approve this with this sort of parking. Right, 3 doors, 4 doors away from Engineers Club is, you know, exactly how many apartments there are. That's how many, you know, is it 33 or 23, whatever, and that's how many parking spaces there are. We cannot take this any further, and we should refuse this and take it back, tell them to do the honours and, you know, make the parking. We need to sort the parking out, because there's already, as you said, Ivy Square is chock-a-block with cars. Next door, the Grange Street is full of cars. When they go on residents' parkings, where will these park? These residents? And I'm sure we can refuse this and, you know, they can look into it again. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with everything that you've said. I think one of the things that was highlighted in the report for me was one of the highways comments about trip generation, where they're trying to compare a 20-bed hotel against a 40-bed residential development. It makes a complete nonsense.
Anybody else? Councillor Kerr.
Chair, colleagues, I was going to pick up on another issue which was raised, which also impacts on the parking situation, which is the bins. And the comment from the highways officer is that the amount of bin store space is inadequate. And thinking of the plan that we've got in front of us, we've got a very small amount of bin stores, and we've got a fair distance from Block B to get to them as well. But it's also very small compared to the number of properties there. I think we've got a bin store about that size for a block with 12 flats in it. And if we triple the size of that bin store, then we're losing 2 parking spaces. So I think there's a conflict here as well, and I'm fearful that the nice green area that is shown there at the moment is the space that could be used either to provide parking or effectively moved around bin store. And I think that the amenity space and the outdoor space is actually as important, as we particularly learnt during COVID, as the other facilities within that sort of site. So I think I agree in this instance. I think there's too much trying to be squeezed onto too small a site.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. I mean, there's one other phrase I looked at, you know, or read here, which probably the first time I've seen it was sort of a modal shift in sustainability. You know, well, I may not be an expert on the Oxford Dictionary, but I guess modal means something that might be or could be or whatever. Now, what is an applicant who's, a resident who moves in there when it has 42 parking spaces, are they really going to complain about the fact that they have enough parking spaces, or that they bought a 2-bedroom apartment which they might have a family member join in, or have some children? Are they going to complain about the fact that they've got too much parking spaces? In 18 years on this committee, I've never come across somebody saying, well, you know what, I want to make a complaint because there's too many parking spaces. And yet this talks about modal shift and sustainability. As I said, I'm at a loss. Anybody else? Councillor Kerr.
Yes, Chair, I'd just like to raise 2 other things which are different. One is I'm actually concerned about the layout of Block B. The bottom left-hand corner of Block B has a completely blank sort of area. If there doesn't happen to be anybody looking out of a window at that point, it is hidden, it is out of the way, and I think it's potentially a corner which could be misused. And I think that design of that site, that corner, needs rethinking. And the second point I wanted to raise is that I'm really pleased to hear, I asked this today, that the new building standards include electric car charging points for new parking spaces. And that's good news. But there seems to be nothing nationally about electric cycle charging. And I've discovered recently that loads and loads of people have got electric bicycles, and I'm still cycling mine with requires legwork. But it suggests to me that the additional cycle parking that's now being proposed for this, which I welcome, ought to be conditioned to have electric charging points related to them. And if we are going to pass it, if colleagues decide this is to go ahead, I would ask that we have a condition that ensures that there is electric cycle charging.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just for some balance, Chair. If you're comparing this proposal to the Engineers Club, the starting point for our consideration of on-site parking levels is the development plan, and we don't have minimum or maximum parking standards. And in the case of the Engineers Club, that was something that was put forward by the developer. That was what they sought as part of their proposal. In this particular case, we've negotiated 21 car parking spaces, and in terms of the ambitions for modal shift, it's in a sustainable location. It affords easy access to the city centre. This level of parking for this site is deemed to be acceptable by virtue of its highly sustainable locational characteristics, and that's why we are moving this forward, Chair, in the recommendation. In terms of the existing site, I mean, clearly it's in desperate need of repair. If you've been to site or you've seen the photographs on the application web pages, it's in a terrible state of repair. It will be open to vandalism. The fire service have said that they won't go in there anymore because of the dangers that are posed by this building. And what we have to do, obviously as a planning authority, is to approve applications without delay that accord with the development plan. And well, in my view, Chair, this clearly does, for the reasons that are stated in the report. I appreciate that we've got wider issues at play in the local area, but we've not been selective in terms of our parking standards. We've looked at it on its merits in relation to what's been put forward by the developer, and based on the development plan, when read as a whole, which you have to do, we feel it's an entirely acceptable scheme and would bring investment, employment opportunities and additional housing to this area. So I don't know where we'd be at appeal, Chair, in this particular case. Thank you.
Well, look, we've had the assembly rooms that's been derelict. We've had the bingo Trocadero on Green Lane that's been derelict for God knows how long, and it's a part of it listed building. We've had other buildings that have been derelict. So if we're saying that simply because this might invite vandalism or is a danger, that we should go ahead and approve a scheme that residents of that area will have to suffer with for the rest of their lives, I don't think that's a good enough reason to approve an application simply because on that basis. Now, if the people who developed the Engineers Club done what they did after their own back, they should be applauded for it. What we don't want in future is for somebody to say, well, hang on a minute, I went out of my way to bring this brilliant development here, thinking that this is how, the sort of ward wants things to be done. And only then we go back to a situation where anything goes. The next developer that comes along is going to say, well, I'm not going to do this. As I said, to me, the reason that you voted for vandalism, danger, etc., you cannot do something on the basis of that, possibility and then have the residents of that area be impacted for the rest of their lives and their future generations to be impacted as well. That is not a consideration, whilst I agree that there are some, things that we, can't legislate for in planning, but this is something that we can. Not sufficient parking, and as Councillor Kerr said, is probably trying to squeeze too much into too little an area. Councillor Kerr, did you have anything else before I put it to the vote?
Chair, I was going to, and I do listen to what the office is saying, and we have got our next item on the list is the waterfall, where we've got it designed to be a no car parking development.
Councillor Kerr, before you go on, before you make any comparison, there is no comparison between the waterfall and the La Gondola, because the waterfall is a building that's been there without parking, is on the main road. The La Gondola is set back, it has a car park, and a new development is being, the waterfall is not being knocked down.
Chair, for the waterfall, it is very clear, if you go there, you haven't got parking space, because there is no parking space. If you come here, I would like to know from the developer how those limited parking spaces are going to be allocated. so that it is clear to a resident that they do or do not have a parking space and where their visitors do or do not have a parking space. And I would like to have that information so that we know how the limited parking is going to be managed by the people in that area. And so that you know which side your bread is buttered when you move in. And I think that is something that they ought to be able to tell us. I think I'd also like to have information back on the waste management and how they think they're going to do that. And I'm also still concerned about that back hidden corner. And I therefore propose that we defer this and ask for information back on those points and any others that people want to add from the applicant.
Councillor Kerr, you've woken people up on the back seat. Matthew wants to come in.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think we need to defer it. I think you've spoken very passionately and clearly about the need for more parking. We see this time and time again on various small applications, large applications, and everything in between. I've many times agreed with you and had the view that parking is an essential part of a sustainable design, regardless of travel plans and modal shift and all the other things which we aspire to do. There has to be a realistic level of parking in these schemes, and this doesn't meet that in my view. There's no need for deferral. I wouldn't support that. And I think, if anything, you know, we send a message back to the developer to actually think again, and maybe they could come back with something more sensible, Chair.
Thank you, Matthew. Councillor Jennings, did you know? Okay.
Chair, Chair, you've had a proposal for deferral, so you need to take a second if there's one.
Right, Councillor Kerr has submitted a proposal for deferral. Would anybody like to second that? We don't have a seconder, so that's not necessary. Can we move on to the... would somebody like this to move this to the vote? Do I have a seconder? All those in favour of the recommendation?
That is to grant that.
Sorry?
Yes.
Yeah, the recommendation is to grant.
Subject to the additional publicity period.
So, just to clarify, the recommendation is to grant the recommendation.
That's what I've asked for. Anybody, all those in favour of the recommendation? All those against the recommendation?
That's 1 in favour and 8 against, Chair.
Okay, the recommendation is refused.
Recommendation was to grant, Chair. So
yeah, so we need somebody as a speaker if we need anybody want to volunteer.
Need some reasons, Chair.
Sorry?
Need some reasons.
Yeah, well, I think the reasons have been sufficiently said. Parking issues, overdevelopment of that, and issues with the bins, etc.
Chair, yeah, you need to actually put a proposal to committee to that somebody needs to propose it and second it if you're going to refuse and have the reasons as well.
Okay.
Chair, may I ask officers' advice on the technical reasons in terms of concerns over parking and the other items that you've mentioned? Could we reference a policy if they've got any advice to top and tail those concerns?
Just to try and help, but if we were considering this as a housing development, i.e. a house, a 3-bedroom house, there are guidelines that say it has to have a parking space. So if we've got 30 2-bed apartments which are family living, surely they have to have a parking space.
As indicated earlier, Councillor Jennings, we don't have a minimum or maximum standards. We look at each case on their merits relative to... it's all spelt out as to what we consider to be an acceptable provision for this site in the absence of minimum or maximum standards. What you would need to do in terms of this decision is to say that there is a lack of parking, and that given the nature of the area and its challenges with existing on-street parking issues, because that's what's been fleshed out in the debate, that it's contrary to policy in that regard in this location. So that's the way you would need to flesh it out. We don't have standards that we can hang our hat on. I thought I'd made that clear.
Chair, as I say, I mean, it's for members to come up with the reasons.
Right, okay.
So, and then propose it. I think one issue, obviously, is that it's difficult to ask officers to come up with your reasons, given that the highway officers have specifically calculated in the report what the appropriate parking he thinks is for that. Now, you may well disagree with that, but it's difficult to put it on the officer, particularly, to come up with a reason contrary to the advice he's given on that.
Well, I'm not sure about that, because there's plenty of previous incidents where the highways have no objections, and we've turned applications down on this ground. But
what I'd suggest, Chair, given what's been said tonight, is that if you were with the parking issue in particular, it's not, I would suggest, going to be refused in accordance with policy CP23, which relates to car parking. It would be in relation to amenity, because policy GD5 talks about general standards of amenity. And I think your overriding concern is that, in your opinion, the lack of car parking on site is going to drive parking onto other streets in the immediate area, which will be injurious to the amenities of those existing residents. I think that's the way you would have to play it. As Stephen said, I can't really get fully involved in fleshing out your reasons for refusal, but I would suggest that that's the way, the direction of travel, pardon the pun, that you should be going on, given what your concerns are about Grange Street, Barlow Street, all the streets in the area, and their overpopulation in terms of on-street car parking. Does that help?
Did you say earlier that this site has been misused for car parking recently? Is that why it's now being fenced off, because it was being used as an unregulated car park? Because that would somewhat suggest to me that there is evidence that there is a shortage of appropriate car parking in this area, which adding more potential cars into that area will exacerbate.
Do you want me to recap, Stephen?
Yeah, I mean, sort of, yeah.
Yeah, I think the primary concern is, your concern is the lack of car parking provision for the site. So, as I suggest, I think that should be talked about in terms of policy GD5 and the general amenity policy. And then you've talked about that and the resultant over-intensive nature of the development for the site. So that would be relative to policies GD5, again, in terms of amenity, and policies CP3 and CP4 and H16 in terms of the character, context and residential development components of it. So I think that's the way you think you should be playing it. And then you've got other technical details in terms of the absence of, or the lack of bin storage.
okay, with what Ian has said and what Stephen has said, would somebody like to, come up with a reason or approve what's been said? Councillor Holmes.
Chair, this may be able to be knocked about a little bit. So insufficient parking and the impact on the amenity / immediate area. My view is that if you reference the National Planning Framework, this application presents severe impact. I missed one of the policies. I do apologise, Ian may have to recap, but contrary to CP3, CP4 and H60, there's another one before that I didn't quite get.
Thank you very much, Matthew, my mate. I knew you'd come in useful someday. On those bases then...
Sorry, Chair, sorry, I was just going to ask, did you want to also cover the bin storage?
Well, I mean, what I'm saying is insufficient parking and the impact, not necessarily impact of parking and the general impact? Do you want a little bit more verbose in there, and the
I-
general impact?
I think there was clarification in terms of concerns about the bins.
The highways comments included reference to the inadequate bins.
Okay, insufficient,
And seem to think you could solve that by saying okay, operator, how are you going to manage this? But you haven't got enough space, the operator's not going to be able to solve the problem.
storage. I mean, what I didn't want to be is be ultra specific, because it's the general impact, but you could say insufficient parking, bins, cycle storage, and the general impact on the amenity slash immediate area. Again, referencing the National Planning Policy Framework, this application presents a severe impact, contrary to CP3, CP4, H60, and there was another one, like I say, that Ian mentioned before that I just didn't quite catch.
Yeah, it was GD5, Councillor Holmes.
GD5.
So, yeah.
So GD5, CP3, CP4, and H60.
16,
16, sorry,
yeah.
16. I do apologise.
Now that we've got that far, thank you very much, Councillor Holmes. Can somebody second that, please? Councillor Jennings, thank you.
You want to take a vote on that?
Yes. All those in favour of what's been put forward?
That is refusal on those.
A refusal on those grounds, that is.
8 in favour, Chair.
Okay. Anybody against? Councillor West.
1 against, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. That is then refused.
Does somebody want to be nominated for any appeal?
I'll do it, Chair. I'll do it if
Councillor
it goes to
Holmes.
appeal, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. On this item, we've got one housekeeping update. We've had one further third-party objection, which has been circulated to members. Our environmental health officer has required that we put a sound insulation scheme for the noise from the pub affecting some of the apartments. So we are suggesting adding this as a condition to the report. To the main body of the report, the proposal relates to the Waterfall Public House on Railway Terrace, which lies in the Railway Conservation Area, opposite the Derby Railway Station. It's the former Midland Railway Institute building, which is a non-listed building in the conservation area, dating from the late 19th century, 2-storey with an ornate red brick facade. It's currently in use as a public house with associated function rooms. Permission is sought to retain the pub use at the southern end of the building and convert and alterations to the remaining rooms and stairwells form 31 apartments, 1 and 2 bed units. The works also involve demolition of a later toilet extension and external staircases at the rear of the building to allow for the formation of landscaped amenity space for the apartments. The former outbuilding is to be renovated and altered to form cycle storage and bin storage, with egress for residents formed only onto Midland Place. Proposals involve subdivision of the principal rooms of the ground and first floor of the building. These include a former ballroom and concert hall to form residential units, with additional floors being formed within the larger spaces to be used to create apartments. Most of the units would be served by existing window openings, some of which would be reopened, and some new windows are proposed to be formed to serve apartments in the rear elevation where demolition is proposed. 2 existing staircases within the building would provide the private access for the residential properties separate from the retained pub use. No off-street parking is available or proposed for the apartments within the development, and given its location on the edge of the city centre and accessible to the train station, bus station and cycle routes, we consider that this is acceptable in this location. In terms of residential amenity, provision of 31 apartments within the building can comfortably be accommodated within the interiors of the historic building due to the scale and overall height of some of the rooms which members will have seen on the site visit. These are currently underused or vacant. The apartments would also meet minimum national space standards and have good access to windows and for light, many of these being original sash openings. Existing properties on Midland Place and Leeds Place sit close to the existing building within the conservation area, although we are satisfied that they would not see an unreasonable impact on their privacy or amenity from the orientation of new and existing windows on the rear of the building. External lighting is not detailed in the application but would be controlled through a planning condition which Derbyshire Wildlife Trust has recommended in order to safeguard nocturnal wildlife. It would also ensure illumination is not overly bright or detracts from the character of the conservation area. The site is a designated heritage asset within the conservation area, and therefore particular consideration must be given to any harmful impacts on the significance and character of that asset. Such a permission should not be granted unless it's in accordance with the heritage guidance in the NPPF. The Conservation Officer has no objections to the conversion or subdivision of the interior spaces to form residential use, or to the demolition works which are proposed at the rear of the building. A small degree of harm has been identified through the addition of new windows, roof lights and solar panels, although the details will be controlled through conditions. Overall, the heritage impacts of the works to the conservation area are considered to be minimal, and there are public benefits of bringing the underused parts of the building back into use and reinstatement of the original window opening. This is considered to outweigh the harm to the heritage asset, which is in accordance with the NPPF and meets the heritage tests in the NPPF. So overall, we feel the formation of residential apartments within this historic building delivers additional new housing in a highly sustainable location on the edge of the city centre, contributing to the city's housing supply. It would form a high-quality living environment with no adverse impacts on the highway network or residential amenity of existing properties. Heritage tests are also met, and such with subject to the 106 contributions which have been agreed, we recommend approval subject to those suggested conditions. There's no speaker.
Thank you, Sarah. Anybody from the committee? Councillor Carr.
Yeah, this is, in my view, an excellent application, Chair. The demolition of those, what shall I call them, hideous carbuncles that were 60s extensions put on the back, it will only improve the building, as will reinstating the old entrance and opening up those windows. It's a really nice application, Chair. I'm fully in favour of it.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Councillor Kerr.
When we went round this building, and it's clearly had a very sad life recently, and I think that to be able to convert what is a beautiful building into a new use is a really positive thing to be doing. I think it is quite intensively being used, but we are being assured that that is achievable within the building, and I welcome the additional recommendation about condition regarding the sound insulation. There is reference to cycle parking in an outbuilding, particularly in light of our conversation about the previous application. Can we have clarity about how many cycle parking spaces are being provided for these 31 flats? This is 31, isn't it? And will they can we condition that they are provided with some sort of electrical charging system?
Sarah?
Just checking my plan. It doesn't have the number of cycle parking spaces, but we can provide clarity on that, and like I said, it would be covered by condition. Yes, in the left-hand side, top left, that is an existing outbuilding, which is already there, but in a dilapidated state, so it's being converted. I would say that plan is potentially indicative, and possibly you could achieve more. We are controlling it by condition, so we can seek as many as we can get within the building.
I think if you want us to just speak to the developer, Councillor Kerr, before we issue any decision, to get you the total number and the position, because I don't know the position on electric cycle charging points, because I don't know about that relative to the building regulations either. But we can clarify that point for you if you'd like that to be the cycle parking condition to be fleshed out before we issue it and you consulted on it.
Thank you for that. Councillor Rawson.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is an excellent application. It's obviously an important historical building within the railway conservation area, and as been mentioned, it's been rather underused and fallen into some disrepair in recent years, as those of us who went on the site visit saw for ourselves. So I think this is a good opportunity to bring back into use an important historical building in the city, and to give it a long-term economically viable purpose is only likely to be able to enhance that particular historic asset. It's very large. Again, those of us who went on the site visit saw. So I don't have any concerns about an over-intensive use of the building. I think the designs are imaginative and make good use of the space that exists there. Just in terms of parking, we have noted that there aren't any car parking spaces associated with it, but I think in this instance, because of its city centre location, there's very little on road parking nearby, and the parking that is nearby is controlled by charging. So I don't think I think people who are considering moving here are going to be very clear that they're either not going to have a vehicle, or it's going to cost them to be able to keep it in a car park of some kind nearby. So I don't think there'll be a parking impact on nearby streets. So all in all, I think it's a really positive application to be coming forward, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Rawson. Anybody else? No? Would somebody like to move it? Seconded. All those in favour of the recommendation?
Eight in favour, Chair. 9, Chair, thank you.
Okay, anybody against? No, that's carried. Thank you. Next application, pages 56 to 61, Normanton Road, and to tell us about that, good God, I've lost. It's Sarah again.
Okay, the final item is a non-material amendment application, which is a 28-day notification for very minor changes to an approved planning permission. This one relates to a proposal for an approved redevelopment of the former Mill Hill Corner furniture store on the corner of Normanton Road and Mill Hill Lane, which was granted full permission in November 2021. The approved scheme is a 3-storey development which includes furniture store, restaurant, retail unit and soft play centre, and recladding and altering the facade of the existing building. The proposed changes under this application are to the north side and front elevation onto Normanton Road to form a covered pedestrian access route to the rear of the building, which would allow drainage runs to be located outside the building footprint. Also small changes to the windows and shop fronts on the Normanton Road and north elevation. On the screen you can see a comparison between what was approved and what we're now dealing with, which are very minor changes. Because they are very minor in nature and do not change the character of the permitted scheme, we are happy to consider that this is non-material and therefore acceptable to be dealt in this manner as per the recommendations in your report.
Thank you. So actually, just one query I wanted to... Indoor recreation. I mean, I've read the report, but I can't find out what they mean by that.
I think in this one it's soft play, children's soft play.
Right, okay. Members of the committee? Oh. Okay, no comments?
Chair, I just wondered why it had been brought to committee.
It was called in by Councillor Nawaz.
I've only got the proposal. I thought this was having the drive-through. You know, that's a different application, is it? And, you know, I was thinking the drive-through, the cafe.
Yes, I believe that was passed under delegated powers for some reason, Councillor Nawaz, so it wasn't this particular one.
I thought that was going to come here as well, so that's why.
Yeah. The drive-through proposal, for whatever reason, was passed under delegated powers when it shouldn't have been, but that's beside the point now. Okay, would somebody like to move this to...
Just move it to the vote, yeah.
Okay, seconder, all those in favour? That's approved. Okay, anybody against, by the way? No, that's approved. Right, we've reached the end of the night, and the final item on there is always the most excitable one, about potential site visits. How many have we got?
We've got about 6 to excite you tonight. 8 is it? Most of these are variations, so I imagine, including this one for the Beckett Well, which is a variation to the public realm. The second one is probably you're familiar with, it's the redevelopment of the Eagle Centre Market, the demolition of the public house, which I think you're familiar with.
Sorry, is that just the demolition phase?
Demolition of the market.
Yeah.
The market, erection of food store, coffee shop, and associated access, parking, servicing. So it's for that element. Okay. Next one is reserve matters for the Snellsmore Grange development, which has outline approval and is currently being developed for 225 dwellings, part of that development. Next one's a variation of condition to Derby Triangle to increase floor space and use class. That's already been developed on site. Next one is one that was part of the former DRI site. It's 123 to 129 Osmaston Road. 3 Victorian properties which are currently derelict. Change of use to form 20 apartments within the 3 buildings.
What are they currently doing? I know that you said they're derelict. What are they currently?
They were previously
5,
healthcare.
6, 7 bedrooms each, or what?
They were healthcare buildings. They were healthcare use for the NHS, but obviously they've been empty and derelict for quite a few years. So
yeah, do you know where the walking centre is? It's that row of houses just before the walking centre.
Yeah.
So they're just literally falling to pieces now.
Okay, next one's a variation of condition for drainage condition on Babington Lane. Next one is the former Garendale buildings on Alfreton Road. It's the site which already has permission for employment use. This one is erection of builders merchants, outdoor storage and car parking on Alfreton Road.
Can I just ask, does that involve demolition of any existing buildings, or has that
I
already
believe those
happened?
buildings have already been demolished.
Gone,
The
have they?
site has been cleared.
Okay.
This is just one part of that wider scheme. I'm sure our highways officer will take note. And I think they have already started work there. And the final one is a variation of condition to the Phoenix Street tower building to amend the emergency access route onto a flood risk. And that's it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much to all of you for tonight, and see you at the next one, hopefully.